Welcome to Formula One and Son. I'm Tom.
And I'm Oscar.
Well, Oscar, we were treated to yet another cracker of a race in Germany, coming off the back of what was a sensational race in Silverstone. But Germany had an exciting race for very different reasons compared to Silverstone.
Yeah. Crashy McCrash race, let's just say.
Yeah, let's just go back before we get into the race and have a look at qualifying. The weekend was characterised by being scorching hot in the early practice sessions.
Like 40 degrees Celsius, which is for American listeners,
it's
like
over
110.
Yeah, well, it's over 100. Yeah, 38 degrees is 100. So, yeah, super hot on the weekend. People struggling. But it kind of cooled down, and then, of course, as it approached the Sunday race, the rain came in, which obviously really shaped the race. But looking at qualifying, we were treated to some excitement even through that. In particular, through the practice sessions, really, we saw the Ferraris back up at the front again.
Yeah, every single practice session, there was a Ferrari at the top, and in the first two, there was a Ferrari in the second place too.
Yeah, so you had Vettel and Leclerc doing really well, looking pretty racy, you've got to say, and Hamilton and Bottas struggling in the Mercedes a little bit. Red Bull's kind of right up there as well, particularly in the hands of Max Verstappen. Obviously, Gasly not so much, as we've come to expect. But then we hit qualifying, and it was really looking like one of those sessions where you go, okay, probably the Ferraris are finally going to get maybe at least a front row lockout or a pole or something along those lines. But we start qualifying, and Sebastian Vettel doesn't start. We get a DNS for the first time. Did not start because of, I believe it was a turbo problem?
Yeah, I think so, right?
Yeah, and so hugely disappointing on a weekend where they look like they've got some speed. Seb doesn't even get out of the garage and doesn't really participate. Well, doesn't participate at all. And so then we do the usual kind of Q1.
I think Leclerc did top that session,
yeah,
right?
you know, Leclerc's showing the speed. I don't think he actually topped that. I think he was maybe he was top, but he was certainly showing some speed. The usual thing that Williams got knocked out, but a few surprises. Albon got knocked out,
Norris
got knocked out. Yeah, and the McLarens actually didn't have a lot of speed really all weekend.
Sainz got lucky once again.
Yeah, Sainz got lucky once again. Sainz was looking okay, actually. He found a bit of speed in the end and finally made it through to Q3 and qualified quite well. But yeah, Lando really struggled. We saw some big upgrades coming this weekend. The Racing Points had some big upgrades that really seemed to work for them. They were much more competitive than they had been in a while. Even Lance Stroll got out of Q1 and made it through to Q2, and Sergio made it through to Q3, which is great. So we get to Q2, and it's all looking pretty exciting. And once again, the Ferrari's looking pretty racy in the hands of Leclerc now, and probably the surprise debacle there was Ricciardo. Debacle's a strong word. The midfield was exceptionally tight. If I recall, there was less than half a tenth between Hülkenberg, who made it through to P9 on a 112.76, Ricciardo on a 112.79, so less than 300ths further down was 5 places down. So there was less than 300ths between 5 places. So the midfield exceptionally tight. And that meant he missed out, Magnussen missed out, Giovinazzi, Kvyat, and the aforementioned Lance Stroll, who we will talk about because he was an interesting character this weekend. So we get to Q3 and we're like, okay, well, it's a pity that Vettel's not there, but that's okay. Leclerc's going to get pole and he's going to show them how it's done.
And then Leclerc breaks down.
We're waiting for him to come out. Then we're waiting for him to come out. And we see the mechanics working on his car. And lo and behold, he doesn't come out. Do we know why that was in the end? Hydraulics or?
I'm pretty sure we don't. I think it was due to the same reason.
No, there was a different side of the car. They were working on a different side of the car.
Might have been exhaust.
Yeah, I can't recall. That's a bit sad.
Whatever it is, he did not start that session.
Nonetheless, we was robbed of a great qualifying showdown between probably Hamilton and Verstappen and Leclerc. Verstappen was really finding his feet and looking
Yeah.
pretty racy. Hamilton obviously snatches pole in the end. And actually does a great lap time. Got it by a good couple of tenths over Verstappen.
Yeah, and then
Bottas was a bit nowhere through qualifying.
he was very close to Verstappen.
He was very close, but he wasn't super close to Hamilton. We've seen him either pipping Hamilton or being right next to him. That wasn't the case here. It was a good 2-3 tenths off, wasn't he?
And then Gasly has his career best.
Gasly had a great qualifying, helped by the fact that neither Ferrari was there, so he gets into P4.
P5 we get Raikkonen, which is
Raikkonen, great.
It wasn't much surprise.
Raikkonen's this really kind of quiet achiever this season, but we'll come back to that. Then Grosjean had a great quali. Interesting, I think Grosjean running the Melbourne spec Haas.
Really?
And Magnussen running all the updates because they're really still trying to get the grips on what's going on for them. We've seen them occasionally have good one-lap pace, but it really falls off.
And then Grosjean out-qualifies Magnussen?
Yeah, it's surprising. So who knows what's going on? Obviously, Silverstone was, a huge disappointment for those guys running into each other. And then
Sainz in P7 also not that surprising.
Yeah, no, good. And then Perez up there again, as I mentioned. It looks like their update's working. Yeah, and Hülkenberg squeezed in to P9. What was interesting as well, and as we were watching Quali, Oscar, I said this to you, as Hamilton got out of his car, he looked I was like, he's got no energy. He's not pumping the air, and he looked like he was getting out gingerly, like he was injured, and it transpired. I hadn't been keeping too close to the news. He was sick and almost didn't do the race weekend. They were talking about bringing Ocon in, who obviously would have relished the opportunity, but Hamilton kind of toughed it out. Question about whether it affected his performance all weekend. We'll get to the race. Lots of mistakes in the race, but some rare runs from Lewis Hamilton. So, yeah, he was a bit sick, and you could see in interviews and his body language just flat all weekend, despite that manages to put it on pole.
So we get to the race, and it is raining like it has never rained before in Hockenheim. It's quite heavy.
Yeah, kind of weirdly heavy, though. Like, it was on and off and on and off. And what we saw characterise the race really was a new rule that they invoked where they start under the safety car, but after it's effectively formation laps. They do 3 or 4. They did actually count to the lap count in the end. They reduced the lap count. Yeah, but they did. It was unclear, actually. The commentators were like, is this going to count? Because they weren't ticking by on the laps. But they ended up doing, 3 or 4 laps under the safety car at the start of the race, effectively to try and, I guess, dry out the track a bit, ascertain the conditions. Drivers coming on the radio saying, we're good to go, let's start. And eventually the new race director, whose name escapes me, I remember Charlie too well, he makes the decision that they're going to do a standing start, which is a new rule. Previously, they could never do that. Their safety car would just peel in and off they'd go.
Really?
But they can now do this where they can, after they go around under the safety car, do a standing start again. So they decided to do that for the first time ever in Formula One history, which was pretty cool. Yeah, and it's wet. I think that they're all on wets, aren't they? Not inters at this point.
Yeah.
We're going to struggle. This was a crazy Grand Prix for anyone that watched it, so we're not going to give a blow-by-blow of pit strategies because it would be terribly long and arduous to unpick all of the... Most teams had about 5 pit stops, I think.
Yeah, I think that was the norm.
Yeah, so lots and lots of pit stops. But everyone starts under the wets, and probably the most notable thing was neither of the Red Bulls got off the line. They just sat there spinning their wheels. So
Yeah.
Verstappen and Gasly just lose massive numbers of positions pretty much straight away, didn't they?
I think so, yeah. Because it's like they didn't start, honestly. It's like they weren't moving.
Yeah, they were just spinning their wheels up. So they lost a number of positions. And then, I don't know, Oscar, how would you then talk about the race from there? Chaos ensues, and we were treated to just action.
I think at this point, I'm just going to say each driver that gets out and in what order that happened.
That's probably worth doing because it was a race of attrition. I think in the end there were only 13 finishes. Is that right?
Correct.
So we need Crofty or someone to give us the stats on when's the last time so few cars finished the race.
Yeah.
So pretty exciting. Most people crashing out. And there's a characteristic, you'll take us through it, but there's one characteristic we should call out, and I'm sure it's going to be much discussed. There's a drag strip near the final corner going onto the start straight. And the asphalt there, when it's dry is fine, but when it's wet is just like ice. And you saw this a number of times. We'll go through it. But you saw cars, if they so much as dropped a millimeter of their wheel onto it, they had zero traction and literally were just skating. And that caught out a lot of drivers.
And only one driver actually survived that.
Yeah, I was surprised. Yeah, we'll get to that. And that was just. So there was some comments from one of the people that got caught out by that, Nico Hülkenberg. And you'll take us through it, Oscar. But I just want to point out something. After the race, I saw him interviewed. And he said, this is atrocious. You know, if you just make a little mistake, you go off and it's like, now you go off and you hit the wall and it shouldn't be like that. You know, most places there's a little bit of runoff. If you go a little bit wide, you're fine. And I was sitting there going, well, no, that's not true, Nico. What about, say, Monaco? If you make a little mistake, you're into a wall. So you know what you don't do? You don't make a mistake. So, yeah, it was like ice out there and it was really, there was a lack of grip. But like many tracks, Baku, for example, through the castle section, you make a mistake, you're going to hit a wall. So I don't think they need to change it. I think drivers, and Nico wasn't the first person to get caught out. So I'm sure they all had information after the first person to do that, who I can't remember who it was, Perez. Perez was one of the first people out, but I don't think he did it there. And so, yeah, I was a bit like, no, mate, harden up a little bit and realize that you need to keep it on the track. And in those conditions, that's, you know, it's all about who makes the fewest mistakes. The winner of the race, which we'll get to, did a 360 spin and still won the race. So, you know, anyway, what were you going to say, Oscar, about who got out? A lot less
people who got out actually did get out in that area you were talking about. Actually, it was the fourth person to get out that actually did it by going off. But a lot of people went off and survived without going on the gravel, like smaller sort of things. Yeah. So who did we lose first from the race, Ricardo?
First
we lost Perez, who on the first lap spun into a wall.
Yep, and he just lit it up. He was on track, gave it a bit too many beans, and just lost it. Yeah, and really disappointing. Obviously, he had a great qualifying.
And then that was the first safety car of the race.
Yeah, and of course there were many safety cars in the race.
I think there were about as many safety cars as the amount of people who got out.
Can I just call out another thing?
Yes.
The safety car I thought the race director did a great job, and the stewards of recovering all of those cars, because when the safety car came out, it was always only a couple of laps, 2-3 laps.
Yeah.
Recovered the car quickly, got the race underway really quickly. It was the kind of race that we could have seen like half of it just about under the safety car if they weren't really on top of the game. So well done to the race organisers, I think, for doing that really well.
Okay. The next person to get out was sadly Daniel Ricciardo because his engine blew up.
Well, no, his engine didn't blow up.
What?
He had an exhaust failure. So,
his exhaust blew up.
Yeah,
okay.
But he was running a really old engine. Well, that's important, right, because of penalties and components and things like that. So massive plumes of smoke. I notionally understand what an exhaust is on a Formula One car. Of course, we know what an exhaust is on a car. Yes. How it fails to generate so much smoke, I am unsure. Of course, the exhaust is usually connected to the turbo, to the wastegate, so maybe something to do with that. But yeah, plumes of smoke, and we saw Ricciardo out. Real shame. Obviously, we're massive Ricciardo fans.
Next person to get out due to another failure, actually, I'm pretty sure that was an engine failure that time, was Lando Norris.
Yeah, Lando had some mechanical failure, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
In the end, and pulled over. And I did see him interviewed after the race. I don't think he knew what it was at that point. It wasn't spectacular, was it? He just kind of lost power and pulled over.
And I'm pretty sure that was at the time the third safety car.
Yeah, he pulled off. And of course, what happened every time there was a safety car is it was getting dry, it was getting wet. It was getting dry, it was getting wet. And so the question, and of course there was a lot of VSCs as well, virtual safety cars.
No.
Yeah, there were. There was a number of pits under. Leclerc early in the race was doing a good job of, because of course he started P10 after not participating in Q3.
There was only one VSC.
Right, okay. Well, he did a good job of pitting under the VSCs, getting effectively under a safety car or VSC. You get what Martin Brundle will tell you is a cheap pit stop, and that's because everyone's going slow. So when you go slow down the pit lane and, of course, stop for a couple of seconds, you lose less distance and time to those around you because they're going slow as well. So it's always a good strategy. And, of course, in this race, it was all about, I'm on the wets, when do I go to the intermediates? I'm on the intermediates, when do I go to the slicks or back to the intermediates? And really, the winners and losers of this race, it came down to a couple of factors. Don't crash, and of course a lot of people did, and be on the right tyres at the right time. Yeah. And if you manage to minimise your mistakes and not crash, and be on the right tyres at the right time, basically you ended up looking like a hero. And we saw a number of unexpected people at the front of this race, which I'm sure we'll get to.
I think Norris generated a VSC, actually. That might have been the VSC you were talking about. And the next person to get out was Leclerc, who just went off at that area you talked about.
Yeah, he was kind of
icy runoff area and then went into the wall.
Had we seen anyone go off there at all yet at this stage?
At this stage, I think Leclerc had hit the curb and kind of skidded around a little bit. Yeah, fine.
Yeah. And do I recall Raikkonen having a little adventure at some point
Yeah,
around there
he did,
as well?
but later on.
Yeah, but Leclerc went off, did a reasonable job of trying to recover it. The irony was he hit a Mercedes advertising sign, which actually fell on his car. So Mercedes crushing Ferrari once again. And he got bogged. There's a bit of gravel. So you go across this drag strip. It's very icy, or not icy, but it's very low traction. Slide across that into the gravel. Only a small strip of gravel, not enough. And he tried to get out, but effectively got bogged, and that was the end of his race.
Next person was Hülkenberg, who got out in the exact same way.
Yeah,
so and not much to talk about there.
But Hockenheim, it was a bit different, actually. I mean, he crashed in the same spot eventually. He lost it a little bit earlier, actually, on the track. Got a little bit of oversteer, but tried to kind of keep into it. Kept his foot in it, kind of went off track, and by then realised he wasn't going to catch it, but actually hit the brakes, and you could see his wheels were all locked up, and he's just sliding across. I wonder, because he kind of lost it a bit earlier, had he done what I'm sure you're going to tell me Lewis Hamilton did and kind of cadenced braked and tried to get a little bit of traction to turn the car, I wonder if he could have survived that. But he just locked it up and careened into the same spot yet again.
Yep, next person to get out. Well, actually, let's talk about this first. So at this point, after Leclerc had got out, Hülkenberg, had got out and generated, I think, the fourth safety car of the race. Hamilton had a little spin. Well, no, he didn't have a spin. He went off into the barrier the same way that Hülkenberg did and went into the barrier. And his front wing was kind of weird, but he managed to continue. He managed to keep his forward motion. Yeah, that's right. And he could just drive out of it and drove past, that bollard thing in the pit lane? He drove a little bit forward and then through the grass into the pit lane. They weren't ready for him. He had a 50-second sitting time in the pit stop.
That's right, because they had to replace his front wing. They didn't have tyres ready for him because he had effectively crashed right at the pit entry. And yes, as you say, he didn't go the right way around the bollard. Interestingly, the rule about coming into the pits on the right-hand side of that bollard, not the left-hand side of it, particularly at Hockenheim, at the Hockenheim ring, is a rule that was introduced because of Lewis Hamilton, a year or so ago, where they went in and he kind of cut across the grass to come into the pits. So they introduced this rule that you can't do that. So he got penalised 5 seconds.
And
for that rule.
They did that, but the next thing that happened was he spun at turn 1. He just got a little bit on the wet side of the track and just kind of had a spin. And there's quite a wide area of grass and gravel there, so he was fine. He just spun and went straight back on the track. Yeah,
because they'd put him on the slicks at this point, hadn't they? Or did he crash on the slicks? Either way,
didn't crash.
Yeah, either way, they were he was pretty upset they'd put him on the slicks. It was kind of the wrong call at the wrong time.
And at that point, he was dead last.
Yeah, and don't forget as well, and he did actually get penalised for this, that it came up on screen. I didn't see it, for going unnecessarily slowly behind the safety car.
He never got penalised.
He did. He got penalised.
Really?
Yeah, after the race, I think. So yes, so it was just a horrid race for Lewis.
Yeah.
He was okay at first. He seemed to kind of have it under control. Obviously, from the start, he was leading. He got away pretty cleanly. Seemed to be doing a Lewis. He's good in the wet, as we know. Seemed to be pulling away. And then, some bad calls. He ended up down the field, had his little crash, had his little spin, got a couple of penalties.
After his spin, Bottas, his teammate, spun the exact same way but didn't make it out. He crashed into the wall.
So Bottas is chasing Lance Stroll at this stage. So he's chasing. So we should mention, of course, Lance Stroll had this amazing race right towards the end because under one of these safety cars, maybe it was the Lewis Hamilton. No, he wouldn't have brought out a safety car. Hulkenberg safety car,
I'm
perhaps?
pretty sure it was the Hockenheim safety
After
car.
one of the safety cars, Stroll, Racing Point made this inspired decision to bring Lance in for slick tyres at this point. So they're all on Intis because it got a bit wet again. Lance comes in as it's drying up and he peels in. He's at the back, basically. He's coming last, I think. Peels in to get soft tyres. The safety car's still out, so he's got opportunity to catch up to the back of the train. And, of course, as everyone's there, then they realise, oh, no, we should all be on soft. So just about everyone else then goes in for slicks. And Lance Stroll's leading the race. Only for about half a lap because Max caught him up pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But for half a lap, Lance Stroll is leading the race. And for the remaining kind of 10 laps of the race,
kind of second.
Is second or third. But we see that there's a fast charging, Max Verstappen, who, of course, catches up with him. And then he's got Denny Kvyat, who likewise has had a kind of good pit strategy catching up with him as well. Lance actually made a little mistake where he went wide at a corner and that let Kvyat past him. Lance said after the race that without that he probably would have ended up in the podium because he thinks he had the speed, and I think he's probably right. So disappointing. But of course, the man that we haven't talked about for a little while is what's happening to Sebastian Vettel because he starts the race in P20. What's his story?
So he started the race. He overtook quite a few people on the first lap, I think.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, I
but
think he got
talking
like
about
6 or 7 cars.
where we're at now, he's sort of chilling in about 9th place.
Yeah, and didn't seem to have a lot of pace, right? At the kind of early stages of the race, got some cars in the first lap or two, but then seemed to not have a lot of pace on the Inters.
Yeah, but then he starts charging up the field,
once he got onto the soft tyres, and again after the race, he commented on this. He said, I felt slow, I couldn't get a rhythm, the car felt kind of lazy on the Inters, but then once he bolted on the kind of slicks towards the end, massive pace. I think he was like 2-3 seconds a lap faster than most people.
Yeah.
He didn't get fastest lap though, did he? Verstappen got that,
Yes, he did.
Yeah. Who did?
Verstappen.
Yeah. So Vettel on a charge, passing everyone, getting past your Albons, your Sainz, and then Stroll. And I think just on the last lap or the second to last lap, got past Kvyat as well and pulls out what, frankly, is an incredible recovery drive after a disappointing quality coming at P2. And, of course, let's not forget last year, right, where he went from hero to zero. He's leading the championship last year come Germany. Ferrari looking great, and Vettel puts it into the wall in Germany last year.
Pretty sure where
in the
Leclerc
wet,
did.
right? It was a bit wet. Puts it into the wall.
Where Leclerc did too, right?
Yeah, I think it was
maybe.
around there. And of course, we all know after that, Ferrari have not looked at all like they could threaten Mercedes. That was kind of the end of their championship kind of attack last year. This year, of course, they're still miles and miles off Ferrari in the constructors and the drivers. But, of course, Lewis, who didn't score a point in the race, but afterwards we learn he did. Because after the race, there's a bit of excitement as well.
No, we're not done.
Oh, sorry, we're not done?
No.
Tell me more, Oscar.
So, in the last lap of the race, Gasly and Albon are fighting.
Yep.
They're sort of scrapping out.
Oh,
Gasly
yeah, the
pulls out to
Gasly Albon,
overtake Albon. I think he does, and Albon gets the undercut. And then they're on an area of the track. And then Gasly goes into the tyre of Albon. Albon somehow does not get a puncture. And his front wing goes completely the wrong way. And he pulls into an area of the track where it doesn't even raise yellow flags, and he's out of the race.
So here's a question for you. Gasly's obviously been pretty disappointing in Red Bull. Albon and Kvyat, you could argue, having a pretty good season.
Well,
Both of
Gasly
them.
was having a pretty good season on Toro Rosso too.
Yes, he had a pretty good season. It was okay. It wasn't spectacular. But Albon and Kvyat, of course, been in Red Bull before. We should say congratulations to Kvyat and his partner as well, who the night before the race, his partner had a baby. So what a weekend for that guy. Having his first child and then getting a podium. Apparently it's been 11 years since Toro Rosso got a podium, which was, of course, the famous Sebastian Vettel podium, I think in Monza, a very wet Monza race, if I recall, when Vettel kind of, was his up-and-coming moment in his career. But should Red Bull, Helmut Marko, be thinking about a mid-season change of driver? Should they?
Mid-season? Would they be?
If it was me, I'd swap Kvyat and Gasly. I really, not Albon. Albon is too inexperienced. I like Albon. He's got a great personality.
But Kvyat's doing better than him, though.
Kvyat is just showing a great maturity, and I think he'd do well in a Red Bull seat.
I think I agree with you.
Yeah, and I don't know, Gasly back down to Toro Rosso. I don't know if they'll do it. They keep making public statements about their support for Gasly, but Albon raced Gasly a number of times in this race and seemed to have the better of him. Every time they met up. So, I don't know. So can we talk about what happened after the race? Okay, so after the race, so we think, okay, that's how it all washes up. Basically, Verstappen, Vettel and Kvyat, your podium, Lance Stroll, a spectacular fourth. Sainz coming in fifth after just kind of keeping his nose clean yet again. Of course, Sainz having a good result. You've got to say he's having a great season. Albon and then Grosjean and Magnussen. But these guys ended up getting a few more points because what we saw was the Alfa Romeos in the points, Raikkonen and Giovinazzi. But after the race, it comes out that they both get a 30-second penalty.
It
and
was
this is
10 seconds, but
it was a stop go. But
so
they added another 20 for the pit time, So it was a stop-go penalty. Can't do that when the race is finished, of course. And so they got a 30-second penalty. That demoted them to effectively dead last, 12th and 13th being dead last with all the retirements we saw. And promoted... effectively promoted, I think, Grosjean and Magnussen up a few positions, but also promoted Hamilton into the points, so he gets 2 points. So this continues his streak of points-winning races to 23 races, I believe. And it promotes a certain Robert Kubica in a Williams to get their first point of the season.
And I don't know how Kubica beat Russell, but maybe Kubica is finally improving.
Yeah, there was a pit thing. I saw George interviewed. He was pretty upset, actually. And you don't see George Russell usually kind of frustrated with the team, being very supportive. There was a point, I think he was behind Lance Stroll when Lance Stroll made that pit for softs that saw Lance Stroll leading the race after that. And George was kind of saying we should pit too. And, of course, that would have promoted them right to the front. And you would think in those conditions they would have maintained a very strong points position. But Williams, of course, played it conservative. Look, in hindsight, it's easy to say, oh, we should have done it. It was a risky manoeuvre. It worked out for Lance, but we saw through the race a few times people pitted a bit too early for slicks, and it didn't work out. 2020 hindsight, just, rolled the dice and didn't get the right result. So disappointing. The issue with the Alphas was one of the torque being sent to the clutch, the torque demand, which is effectively how much throttle and demand the engine is putting on, was not the torque being delivered to the clutch. So I think, Oscar, you said earlier, it kind of amounts to traction control a bit.
Yeah. It is.
And this is off the start, I should say. Now, Fred Vasseur, who's the team boss of Alfa Romeo, said, we had some kind of malfunction on those formation laps. It wasn't because we were cheating, and we're going to protest the decision because it was really just a malfunction. I haven't gone back to watch Giovinazzi's and Raikkonen's starts to see if they particularly got good starts. I don't know if you remember from the race, Oscar. Did they get particularly good starts?
I think it was pretty
I don't
average.
remember noting it. And they were up in the top 10, weren't they? They both qualified in the top 10. No, they didn't actually. Giovinazzi didn't. Raikkonen did. He had a P5 start. Giovinazzi was down in P11. Yeah. Look, that happened after the race. So there you go. So that was your German Grand Prix. Did I miss anything, Oscar? We probably missed a lot, I think we got the bulk of it.
I think so.
What you can say, as I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, different to Silverstone. Silverstone was dry, wheel to wheel, battling, very exciting. This was edge of your seat stuff because of the changeable conditions, and one of those races where mid-pack teams can look like heroes. Yeah. What we should say, of course, is another, in fact, a double podium finish for Honda, which is great. So, they're very excited. They probably didn't expect it with the Toro Rosso. Kvyat getting a podium before Gasly, despite the fact, Kvyat's had podiums before, of course, when he was in Red Bull. Yeah. But, Gasly hasn't had a podium this year, and now Kvyat's got one.
Yeah, Kvyat was probably better in Red Bull when he was in Red Bull than Gasly is now.
Kvyat got 5. Yeah, that's an interesting... we'd have to go back and look at the results Kvyat was getting, but that's when he was crashing a bit. But let's not forget, Gasly has crashed a bit, crashed twice in winter testing, which really hurt their winter testing program, so started on the back foot. Had a good qualifying, looked like he was recovering well after he did get. Now, remind me, Gasly had a crash in one of the practice sessions in Germany too, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
Yeah, and then kind of recovered to have a good qualifying, but then, the Albon incident was probably just a racing incident. No one got penalised for it. But, he's... we're going to have to watch that. I really do wonder if Red Bull will be thinking about a change. But anyway, we shall see.
So I just want to go over the Drivers' Championship at this point, because I don't think we've done that
quickly?
yet. So quickly. So we have first Hamilton, then Bottas, and Hamilton just sets the bar with 225 points. So we have...
How far is Bottas behind now?
Bottas is now 40 points behind him.
Okay, so closes... didn't close the gap up because he didn't finish and Hamilton got 2 points.
Yeah.
So Hamilton stretched the gap to Bottas, but I assume Verstappen closed up the gap.
Verstappen is now 20 points behind Bottas.
Only 20 points behind Bottas, so he's only, 40 points behind.
Yeah, then we have Vettel and Leclerc, 4th and 5th respectively. Leclerc is 20 points behind Vettel. And then we have Gasly, who has less than half the points of Leclerc. And then Sainz, who's catching very quickly up to Gasly.
Yeah.
And then we have Kvyat.
Yeah, well, Kvyat would have just done well after this race.
Raikkonen, Norris, and I keep clicking on the wrong thing. Ricciardo, all within
a point or two of each other, are they?
5 points.
Yeah.
And then Stroll and Magnussen are tying. Then we have Hülkenberg, 1 point behind that.
Is Hülkenberg that far down? Man, he really missed these points from this race.
Albon in 15 and Perez in... Albon with 15 in 15. And then Perez in 16 with 13 points. Grosjean with only 8 points. Giovinazzi with 1. Kubica tying with Giovinazzi. And Russell with 9.
Russell, the only pointless person so far.
And then, in the constructors we have Mercedes, Ferrari, Red Bull, McLaren, Toro Rosso, Renault, Racing Point, Haas, Alpha, and Williams.
How far are Red Bull off Ferrari in the constructors?
Red Bull are 40 points.
Okay.
50.
Yeah, okay. So not too far behind. So, if they have a good run of it. The next race is Budapest, and Red Bull are typically pretty strong there. So, could be interesting.
Something I'm noticing, there was Renault at only 3 points off Toro Rosso.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, well, that's your lot from the an exciting German Grand Prix. We'd appreciate if you rate and review us on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcast.
Yep, you can email us with any comments on formula1andson@gmail.com.
And, of course, you can tweet us at Formula1andSun or catch us on Reddit. Our username is Formula1andSun, not surprisingly. Oscar, thanks for joining me for this podcast. That's it from Formula 1
and Sun.